So this lesson is about quickly setting up your QuickBooks Online. Some of you may already have your QuickBooks Online set up, but I will encourage you to go through this video as well, just because you may have missed something in your setup, and we want to make sure that you kind of cover everything. So we're back to our dashboard, and we're going to click on the gear icon. And what you're going to look for is the very first column, your company, and we're going to go to accounts and settings. So the first thing you're going to do, this is kind of, the backbone of where QuickBooks gets its information for your business. A lot of this was probably entered when you actually set it up, but it only asks for the basic information. So if you click on the little pencil icon, the edit icon, you're able to add your logo, have your company name, make sure that it's the correct one, whether your legal name is the same as your company name, and then enter your company's EIN number. Here in the next section, company type, I'm going to explain the difference between this. So a lot of you may have set up an LLC. So you are a single member LLC. So if you see this drop down, your first thought would be, oh, I'm an LLC, I will choose partnership or limited liability company. Unless you have more than one owner, so you have multiple owners in your LLC, or you have elected S Corp tax status, then you actually need to choose the sole proprietor button, and because you will be using a Form 1040 Schedule C. So let me just reiterate that. If you are a single member LLC who has not elected S Corp tax status, and if you have elected S Corp tax status, you would know. So if you're like, I'm not really sure, most likely you have not, then you need to choose that you're a sole proprietor, because what you want to do is let QuickBooks know that this is the form that you're going to be using for taxes. So as it's creating your accounts, it's making sure that they kind of align with that tax form. If you have an industry, in this case, landscaping services, and we're going to hit save. So here in this contact information, just making sure that you fill out your company email, whether it's the same as the email that you actually want your customers to see. And what that means is, for example, my email for most correspondence is going to come to Carleen@c2accounting.com, whereas my customer-facing email on invoices and things like that will say info@c2accounting.com. Same here, here's your company phone, website. I always encourage you to put all this information in, because that way it will show up on all of your forms, which we'll get to in a few, how to customize your forms. In the next section, we're talking about address. Same thing like with email. You have your company address, you may have a customer-facing address, and then you may have a legal address. They may be all the same, they may be different, but just in case, make sure that you have that information updated. And this is just marketing preferences. So that takes you through the company setup. Usage, QuickBooks has limitations on usage. Most of you will not have to worry about using too many of your accounts or your chart of accounts or your billable users. Each version of QuickBooks has different usage limits. So whatever your version is, you will see your usage limits. So now we're on the sales tab, and we're going to go to customizing the way your customer sees your forms in the next section. But this over here is a lot about preferences. Do you invoice clients? And if so, what are your terms? Are they net 30? Are they due on receipt, net 10? And this is customizable if you need to add something different. Do you have a preferred delivery method? Are you going to actually send invoices and things through QuickBooks? Do you want to send it later? Do you want to print? This is really not that important, because you can always do whatever you need to do at any given moment. If you're shipping to clients and you want to have that on the receipts, on your invoices or your statements, you can do that as well. If you have any custom fields, you can add those in here. I think you have 3 custom fields. If you want to use custom transaction numbers, so typically QuickBooks will just number your invoices, your receipts, just automatically. So like, for example, if you wanted to start your invoices with 1001, something like that. Then the very next one will be 1,002, and so on and so forth. If you want to do something custom, then you can do that. Personally, I will say doing custom invoices is very difficult because you have to find a way to keep track of what's the next sequential number. So unless you have a really good reason to do custom numbers, just let QuickBooks do the auto date. If you have a type of business where you're servicing a client and you want to show the date work was done, you can put that on there. If you offer a discount, if you take deposits and you want to have that reflected on your invoices, you can have that as well. And also if you have tips. So I'm going to click off of that for a second. So tips or gratuity, you've gone places where, and now it seems like everyone says, hey, do you want to leave a tip? Do you want to leave a tip? And so, you're swiping your card on their Square reader. In this case, in QuickBooks is saying, if you want to leave a tip, how are those tips going to be done? Is it just for you, or are you splitting with your team? So if you have the type of business where you're receiving tips from clients, that's not something we're going to go over right now. But if you have specific needs about tips, because it's more of a unique situation, definitely put a message in the Facebook group and we will address it. And if there are lots of people, then we will add a quick bonus section on tips. So the next section talks about products and services. Again, this is all customizable. This is all based on what you want your clients to see. Do you want to track the quantity and the price on your invoices? Do you want to track, are you tracking inventory on hand? If you're doing progress invoicing. So this is a really cool feature. If you have a project, say for example, you have a $10,000 contract to build a deck for a client, and you charge them $2,500 as a deposit, and then $2,500 once the bottom layer is done, and then another $2,500 once the railings go up, and then the final $2,500 once the project is done and they've checked off everything. So you can do that. Before, you would have to create an invoice for each section, and now you still do, but they're all tied to one project, and it makes it a lot easier for you to track what's left to be built on a particular project. So we're going to check that and hit save. Now messages, so there are lots of there are a couple of default messages that you can have on your forms to your clients, whether or not you want to use a greeting, what type of greeting, dear or to, their full name, their first name, last name, and then you can change these based on whether it's the invoice estimate, and you can kind of create a custom email message. That way, when you are sending emails from QuickBooks for these particular forms, it's automatic. You don't have to go in and type everything up each time unless you decide you wanted to do it that way. Same thing with the estimate forms here. Reminders, so you can actually send reminders on past due invoices if that's something that if you actually invoice your clients and they're late paying, you can send reminders. Also here, you can create a standard reminder email. Of course, you'd want to, if a client is really past due, send something more forceful, but this is just a gentle reminder. This online delivery section just talks about how you want your invoices and things to be emailed with a PDF attached and a short summary. You want to show the full details. You want to be HTML online. So what I would say, if you're unsure as to what all of those mean, you just kind of want to see what it's like. And most of us have more than one email address. You can always do a dummy invoice in QuickBooks and send it to yourself in different formats just to see what it looks like, so you'll know exactly what it looks like for your client. If you do invoice and you do collect payments, then you want to be able to send statements. This is a way to do that. Expenses, again, very simple. It's based on preference. Whether or not you have expenses that you're going to charge back to your client. A lot of these are, with most small businesses, you're probably not going to have a lot of this that you need to worry about. However, if you have if you purchase something for the sole purpose of passing it on to your client and passing that cost on to your client, then we can definitely help you set that up. But because it's not something that we see very often, we're not going to go into a lot of detail in this course. And finally, the advanced tab is pretty important, but I just want to point out a couple of things. The accounting tab, we talked about fiscal year, income tax year, very basic. We talked about accounting methods, accrual versus cash, but this is a really important section here, closing the books. So what you want to make sure is that you never ever, I'm going to say this again, never ever go in to close, delete, or edit any transaction that happened in the previous tax year once the books are closed. So for example, if we are in July of 2019 and you've already filed your taxes for 2018, those books are done. You should not be going back into any kind of transaction dated December 31st, 2018 and back and making any sorts of changes. And this prevents that from happening, especially if you have multiple people using your QuickBooks file. So you can put the date. I always do it for the December 31st, the year before. And I can allow changes after warning, or I can actually make the person use a password. Again, it depends on your company. It depends on how many people are going to be using QuickBooks. If you feel like, okay, I have 3 people who are going to be using it, I'm really worried about them accidentally changing something from the previous year, then you might want to do a password. If it's just you and you know better, then you can just go ahead and just have a reminder to not mess with anything for the previous year. Company type, tax form, we've already gone over that. Chart of accounts, enabling account numbers. Right now it's off, I would say, unless you have a really good reason for using account numbers. If you're a small business, I would not bother. It's just extra work. But if you really like the look of having account numbers, you can actually do that, and then you can enable them and show them on your chart of accounts. If you give discounts to clients, QuickBooks has a default discount category. If you collect tips, we talked about that. It lets you decide where those tips are going to go, and if you have any billable expenses. Tracking of classes, there are a couple of things, options for if you have, especially if you're a nonprofit and you have multiple projects and you want to track, a particular fundraiser, all the expenses and income for a particular fundraiser, classes is a great way to do that. If you have different product lines that have different costs associated, and you don't want to have this ridiculously long chart of accounts, you can do some manipulation by tracking via class. For locations, if you have, we're going to go ahead and click on this so you can see, if you have different locations, different business sections, not different companies, but different parts of your business, different departments, divisions, locations, and you want to be able to track income and expenses by these different parameters, locations or stores or territories, then this would be a great way to do that by using categories. Automation. QuickBooks tries to make things as easy for you as possible, but sometimes in trying to make things easy, they actually cause you a little bit more of a headache. So this section here, let's see if I can do the spotlight. So here where it says automatically apply credits, always take that off, and automatically apply bill payments. We're going to take that off. And here's why. QuickBooks is saying, well, if you receive a credit from a vendor, we're just going to apply it to the oldest bill that you have with that vendor. Or if you receive a payment from a client, we're going to automatically apply it to the oldest invoice the client has with you. That usually is the case, but it just doesn't always work that way. Just for example, this past month, I had a client who we received their July payment, but June was still past due. Now, had I not been aware of this, I would have applied the July invoice to June, and so the client would not have, he would constantly have been a month behind, and we would have not figured out what will happen. So what I was able to do is apply the July payment to July and go, hey, we have your July payment, but we're still missing June. So he apologized and sent the check in. So applying things to the, making sure what you put in your books matches what the intention was of your client is very, very important. So I would say take off anything that says automatically apply, because it will probably come back to bite you in the butt at some point. Projects is a great function. If we talked about that before, and this is already in, so we can hit save. Time tracking, we're not going to discuss time tracking in this course because we are not dealing with payroll. But if you need to track time for a particular project, then you can do it. Or you just want to track time in general, you can do that as well. And currency, basic, we're in the US, so unless you have a multinational company, you're going to be using US dollars. You shouldn't really have to change that. Here, the only thing I would want to say under other preferences, if your customer base is not called customers, if you want to call them something else, you have options. Like, for example, I don't have mine as customers, I have them as clients. I just like that term better. If you're a nonprofit, you would have donors. If you have some sort of, maybe you're a spa and you want to call them your guest. If you're an organization, you have members. Obviously, if you're a medical office, you want to call them patients. And if you are doing rental property, you have tenants. And this is just, for your benefit when you're going through QuickBooks, instead of just saying customers, it's more geared towards your individual industry. So that is it as far as the setup. This is the back end of QuickBooks. And I want to make sure, I took some time on that to make sure that when you set it up that you hit everything, because it's easy to kind of just gloss over that and think it's not important. But I will say that taking the time to make sure that that is set up correctly will help make things go easier for you going forward. So that's it for this one, and our next lesson will be coming up shortly.